My name's Dawn Cameron, but I'm by far the least important person on the stage this evening. Perfectly happy to be. Welcome to Leeds Central Library, which has been the host for the past 4 months, I think it is, to the Rebellion to Romance exhibition. This is that exhibition. The exhibition charts the experiences of the generation which succeeded what's now referred to as the Windrush generation. It's the generation which came to adulthood in the 1970s and 1980s. I'm part of that generation, as is Susan. I don't think I'm giving anything away there.
Me too.
Yes. And it's the generation for which the term Black British was coined. If we kind of look back, those of us that are old enough to look back to those sorts of years, some of the sort of rallying calls of the time were things like "here to stay, here to fight," and "we are here because you were there." And those sort of rallying calls and those sorts of political movements speak to what was then a new understanding of what blackness was in a British context. It was also a time of massive contrasts. So we had Rock Against Racism, we had anti-deportation movements, and we had the National Front, who every Saturday sold their newspapers on Land's Lane in Leeds city centre. As you can see, the exhibition includes objects, photographs, fashion, flyers, memorabilia, which has been carefully curated by one of our guests this evening, Susan Pitter. And at the centre of the exhibition is a set of photographs, images taken in the 1970s and 80s, contrasted with contemporary portraits taken by our special guest this evening, Vanley Burke. Vanley hails from St Thomas in Jamaica, and as a teenager came to the UK to join his mother in Birmingham. He's been described as the godfather of Black British photography, and he's dedicated the past 50-odd years to chronicling the stories of Black Britons, and in particular Black Britons in Birmingham, because Vanley is very much a Birmingham photographer. So we're very grateful to have him here in the north of England. His work's widely exhibited, and he's the subject of a major retrospective called Blood and Fire, which is on show at Soho House in Birmingham till the end of this month. I spoke to Vanley the other day about where else is exhibiting his work just now, and if I just said everywhere, that would just about cover it. Aberystwyth, Manchester, there are some private galleries, there's a law firm somewhere in London. Vanley rightly is a man whose work is difficult to avoid just now. Vanley is driven by an imperative to ensure that Black people's lives, contributions and experiences are recognised and documented. He wants to ensure that Black people are not seen as just passing through. He's joined this evening by Susan Pitter, who, on behalf of Jamaica Society Leeds, is the director of the Out of Many Festival of Jamaican Arts, Heritage and Culture, which marks, this exhibition is part of that wider festival. It marks 60 years of Jamaican independence, and it's an ambitious festival. Many people, many visitors have said there is nothing of quite its ambition anywhere in the country this year, and which is something I'd agree with. It's delivered in collaboration with partners from across the city and beyond, and including, of course, Leeds Libraries, who are our hosts this evening. It combines visual arts, music, heritage, events, literature, artist commissions, spoken word, and other art forms that I'm sure that I've missed out. It's funded by an array of funders, the key ones of which are Arts Council England, National Lottery Heritage Fund, and a bunch of others who are all duly credited on the Jamaica Society Leeds website. So I think that's the formalities out of the way. Should we start? What we're going to do over the next hour or so is we're just going to have a bit of a conversation with Vanley and with Susan before moving on to about 15 to 20 minutes for Q&A. So we'll be looking to finish in the next hour or so. So Vanley, over to you to start off with. I wondered if it's probably best to start at the very beginning, really. It might be interesting for the audience to know a bit about where your interest in photography began.
Yes, it would be interesting for them to know. Sorry. So I was born in Jamaica, St. Thomas, up in the foothills of the Blue Mountain. I describe it as a place where there's a big echo. Is that a problem? I describe it as a place where if you imagine you're going somewhere, you're going on a holiday, you take a plane, it takes you to the country, that's the destination, and you jump in a car, and that car takes you towards your destination. Well, for me, that car doesn't take me home. It takes me to a point where the road runs out, and you get on a donkey, and when the donkey runs out of its road, I live around the corner. That's pretty rural. So imagine as a young man living in Jamaica, receiving a camera in one of the many parcels that were sent to me by my family. These are parcels that would be sent by people who had immigrated to England for birthdays, Christmas, and special occasions like that. In there was a Kodak 127 little Bakelite camera. Normally, we used to get these little American sort of police cars. You know, you wind them up and they go, or you used to get these cap guns. You know, you pretend to be American, like Wild West sheriffs and things. So mine was a camera, and the fascination of this was immediate. You have to imagine as well, we didn't have, not only did we not have internet in the time, obviously it wasn't invented, but we didn't have electricity. They used to charge a battery, and the radio used to run off this battery. And I used to look at the back of the radio to see who was talking. You know, we didn't have cars, so it's pretty rural. So I'm just trying to, set the scene. So when this camera came, I was fascinated by it. It was first how it works. So how did the picture get from there to inside the camera? And all of that. So I sort of exploring that and taking a few photographs. I didn't really take a lot of photographs there because, films were expensive. And by then my parents were here. I was living with an aunt, and if she said she don't have no money for you, then that's how it go. So that was kind of like how.
What were you taking photographs? What were you taking photographs of at that time?
I remember the first photograph I took, I still have, and it's not because of my careful archiving of my work, but my grandmother had it in her album, and when she died, I retrieved it. But it's a house. Right. It's a house, a newly built house in Mount Lebanon, St. Thomas.
Excellent. So you moved from this incredibly remote part of Jamaica to Birmingham in the West Midlands in 1965. That's a huge contrast. And I know that in other interviews you've talked about arriving in Birmingham in a really momentous time. Can you paint a bit of a picture of what was happening in Birmingham at the time, how it felt?
Well, the immediate response to arriving in England. Well, first of all, if I tell you, we used to sit on the hillside and watch the airplane flying overhead, and we used to shout to the airplanes, like the name of the people you have back in England. Like in my case, my grandfather, Papa Mardy sent something for me, to the airplane, and obviously it worked because the camera came back. Right. But we also used to eavesdrop on people's conversation. Because as kids, they don't tell you things. So in order to find out what was happening in England, you have to, when the letters arrived and they're discussing it, you hear what they're saying, and that's how I found out. So then come my time to come to England. I was 14 and a half, but then I have to reassess it. She's no longer around, and nobody here knows her, so I can say it. I live with an aunt who are described as, down from hell, really. So I was very happy to escape Jamaica at the time. But interestingly, what happened is I should have traveled, I think it's the 13th of May or something like that, and I got on the plane, and they couldn't find my passport. So what they did is they sent me back. I had to go back to Aunt B, but then I'd broken a bottle of coconut oil, and on top of that, I had there were pretty big people in the community. And then I'd moved from up in the hills. These are people, you know, when my grandparents left, I moved to live with them. And when they sent you to shop, you didn't take money. You know, you just order on their account sort of thing. And while I was at school, I took a few bullock cakes, which we never pay for. You know what I mean? So when I go back, I had to answer for the bullock too, as well as the thing. So, you know, when I decided I was coming, so all of these conversations that I kept hearing about life in England, you know, people in factories, I heard about that and all of this. So I was intrigued. So when I got here now, it was like, what was this place like? We heard about cold, we heard about fog, smog, all of this sort of thing. And my first impact, as with many people who traveled, was the houses. You know, the fact that they all had chimneys coming out of them and smoke coming out of them. And as many people said, I didn't think it at the time, but I've heard many people say, oh, you know, so many factories were bound to get work and all of that sort of thing. It was dull, it was gray. And, you know, the long drive to Birmingham, where my parents by then had a shop on Grove Lane, and it was so small and dingy, you know, the space, because I live on top of a mountain, you know, we do have a false, well, I call it a false sense, but a sense of superiority, because we look over everything. They're just rolling mountains. So you come in the shop and you could only see the house before you. The back garden was not much bigger than the stage, really. So it was like very claustrophobic. And, you know, that's the environment that I kind of met, you know, when I came here.
Did you form any, I mean, gosh, you were 40 and a half, you said. Did you form any sort of impression of what was happening sort of politically, socially at the time?
Not immediately. No, not immediately. I was more interested in, you know, what were these people, who were they, what were they doing, you know, what is this thing called fog, snow, how they live, and somehow people smelled different in those days as well. You know, there was a sort of a smell that, you know, you couldn't get used to at the time, you know. So, yeah, so it was just a sort of curiosity, yeah.
Did you get any impression of what it meant to be black in this country?
I think my idea first came in school and so on. I remember riding a bicycle and this policeman told me to F off the pavement, and I thought, policemen don't do that. You know, because in our society, policemen, teachers, and all those people are people of authority, and you trust them and things, and then for a policeman to tell you to get off the pavement in such, you know, aggressive way, it wasn't, you know. And then at school, I remember there was, you know, the racism you met. It wasn't, for me, it wasn't as extensive as many people. I mean, I remember once we used to have to wash our hands, you know, before we had school meals, and the teacher said one day, he says, oh, go on, I wouldn't know if it's clean anyway, you know. And we were in a class which is English for immigrants. But, you know, a lot of the guys, they fought back. You know, I remember, I don't know exactly what happened this day in a science class, but, you know, a young man by the name of Fuller, I think the science teacher had upset him, so he kissed all his knuckle and then he whacked the teacher. But he wasn't expelled, so he must have been in the right.
Let's talk about your photography, which we're surrounded by this evening. So you're widely considered to be one of the greatest chroniclers of the Black British experience. And one of the things that you've said is that history will be written whether we participate in it or not.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking that your photography is your way of participating. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, the idea of history will be written, you know, whether we participate in the writing or not. I think it was very important that we participate in the writing of our own history, and it was at that point, or that point of thinking, that I decided that it was important that I, with my newfound skill, decide to start using photography to document, to write that history. I was quite, not worried, but I was quite concerned about what was happening and what we were reading about in the press, you know, the negative press that we were receiving, both published and television and all the rest. It was all about, you know, war in Africa. And of course, at the time, you know, black people were no good. They haven't invented anything. And strangely enough, if a black man told you at the time, you know, that, oh, you know, a black woman had calculated the trajectory for a spaceship, unless you hear it from a white man, you know, I believe it. You know what I mean? Because we were no good. We were told we were no good. And we knew we knew differently, but somehow there were no proof. We didn't have the internet to cross-check anything. Most of the books and libraries and things were not readily available, you know. So we were starved of this information, and it is by way of trying to address some of these issues that I decided. I thought to myself I was in a particularly unique position in our history, because we had just started, if you like, the arrival. It's about 30 years prior to me coming here that black people were, you know, the Windrush and all of that sort of thing. And I thought, well, I'd start taking photographs, and the photographs that I couldn't take, I would collect stories and memories of these people. I thought, well, you know, history as a starting point, and for us it is this point, and it is only as good as it is recorded. So let me start. So I just started documenting, you know, the lives and experience. But at first, I mean, the box brownie that I took with me wasn't really sufficient for taking photographs. You know, things had moved on, not least of all, not since then, but it was more like not a toy camera, but it's like one of those little tourist cameras that you had. And, you know, things you take on holiday. But when I came here on the high street, I saw, you know, cameras like Rolleicord and not Canon, I don't know if it was invented then, but a few other cameras, Practicas and Pentax and so on. And they were all behind this glass at the chemist. They used to sell them, and I used to go and stand in front of the glass and hope that they would materialize on the other side of the glass. And I started saving my pocket money, which was about $1 a week or something like that, to get this camera. And but it didn't last. You know, a £70 camera for $1 a week. You know, it's going to take you an awful long time. So I remember I bought my first camera. I can't remember what the first. It was a cheap camera, and then afterwards I suppose my first serious camera was a Practica Nova 1B, which I took great pride in using. I started teaching myself photography by you know, developing a little studio in the cellar of my parents' house. And later on, when my grandparents had their own house, I used the coal house at the back of the house, the coal shed, you know, where they dump the coal. I used it at the back as a dark room. And an uncle of mine, you know, when I asked him to help me to convert it, the first time we touched the roof, it fell in, so we had to rebuild all of that. Put sink and water and that sort of thing. And that's where I spent a lot of time, really. While my friends were going to parties, I was in there trying to understand what was going on. And that's, you know, pretty well a continuation. Later on, I went to I did an evening class, and there I met an Indian guy, Sureshi Joshi. And, you know, he was very good in terms of, you know, helping. But evening classes, you know, they take you out on outings, and you go and find a studio and they photograph women. You know, I mean, I wasn't particularly interested in that, but then I was interested in people. Later on, I got a chance to go to the School of Photography, where I studied photography. And after that, I had a Kodak bursary. And I thought, if Kodak thinks what I'm doing is okay, then I must be on the right track. Because we didn't have mentors in those days. You can tell me to shut up when you want.
No, I'm just listening. Great for me.
You know, we didn't have mentors in those days. You know, we didn't have anyone that you could go to. I remember there, you know, we had the high street photographer, Plants, which was a white woman that runs a studio. But she was so particular about the people, and they were so particular about being photographed, that she went to Jamaica to learn from a photographer in Jamaica how to photograph black people. I did a couple of weeks with them. That didn't work out. You know, it wasn't what I wanted to do. And then there was this other black guy that had a studio, and I asked him, well, could I spend a bit of time with you? And he was charging me 30 quid, and that was a lot of money in those days, so I didn't go with him either. And so, you know, what informed me really was the politics of the time. By then, we were seeking answers to some of the queries that we were, you know, that was being posed. And so there were, people started to run supplementary education, there were protests, there were all sorts of things. And I think it's those conversations that informed the politics, which then took over the work that I did.
Yeah, I was going to get onto that, because lots of your photographs in the sort of late 70s are of, I mean, actually the breadth of your work is extraordinary, because you photograph very ordinary scenes, portraits, and you also in the late 70s photographed a lot of, you know, demonstrations, marches, as I was talking earlier about anti-deportation rallies, and I think you photographed, there was an Africa Liberation Day in Birmingham, which they say at the time was the biggest gathering of sort of black people in, you know, in a protest in the UK. So your interests are incredibly broad, aren't they? From the everyday to these bigger sort of momentous political events.
Yeah, I mean, what I wanted to do was, excuse me, what I wanted to do was to, like I said, I didn't have mentors at the time, so I had to structure the idea to mentor myself, if you like. So I made a framework of that I wanted to hang, you know, this project on, and for me it was you know, between birth and death, basically. So I started making, what do you call it, you know, politics, religion, social, you know, I made these headings and I tried to populate them with images. I imagine there was a young man in Jamaica who I grew up with, and we used to talk about life in England, and some of the questions we posed then are questions, if you like, that I tried to answer in his absence. So if he wasn't here, I would produce a set of images that would answer all these questions, you know, like, what is the, so nothing was taken for granted. So what's the tree like? You know, what is the street like? Because, you know, you're a little boy living in rural Jamaica, you might suffering from some superiority complex because you're on top of a mountain, but, you know, we didn't know where the plane was going. It went up in the cloud, and, you know, is the land, is it laid? We weren't, you know, I mean, how does this thing work? So I was trying to answer a lot of these questions for this person, and I later thought if a man or woman came from Mars and they saw the photograph, they should be able to understand the lives that were being trying to explain within the photograph. So there was a lot of thinking around, you know, what you're doing and why you're doing it. And also there was the politics of, you know, migration and identity and belonging. You know, a young man might have borrowed some money from his aunt or uncle or grandmother in Jamaica to come to England, and for some reason it doesn't work for him, and you see him in a pub on a Friday evening, you know, supping on a barley wine, and, you know, the sadness of that for me, you know, I try to relay in some of the photographs that I take. And for example, he might be just sitting at the counter, you know, drinking with his one barley wine, and he's marking the pools in the hope that, you know, with what he gained from that, he might be able to redeem himself with his family. So, you know, it's all of that. It wasn't just ever a photograph of a man standing behind. It's like, what is it behind? Photography is writing with light. So what are you writing about? What are you saying with the subject, with the images that you take?
Yeah. You've said, haven't you, that you're not trying to capture a moment in time, but you're wanting to provoke a conversation.
Yes, I mean, for me, it's all about conversation. If you're commenting, I mean, if I were to take a photograph and just put it there and it says nothing about what I'm trying to do, then it doesn't serve its purpose. It's about, you know, how do you provoke a conversation, you know, about whatever subject that you're trying to do. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Thank you.
I don't think I
Haven't-
really fully answered that
No,
question.
it's a really good answer to a question I might not have asked, but it was a
Okay.
better answer than it was a question, I think. You've taken a lot of photographs in Handsworth Park in Birmingham.
Oh, yes,
Um,
that was the one.
Yeah, which you describe as the front room of the community, because it was a space where if you had an event that was going on that couldn't be accommodated in your house, then you'd take it out to Handsworth Park. And interestingly, if you look at a lot of the images here, when we've asked people to talk about Potter Newton Park, which is probably our equivalent of Handsworth Park, they say similar things. But I know from talking to Susan that you insisted on taking the contemporary portraits that you can see here in Potter Newton Park. Why was that?
Well, I was very interested in the first generation. I think that a lot of them, spend their time in factories and homes, that sort of thing, and looking for their kids who were normally in the park riding bikes and things like that. So over the years, we've developed a relationship with these public spaces, and I wanted, we arrive in these so-called inner city spaces, and we occupy them. Virtually make them their own, they were our ghetto, as we referred to them, as, they were where the carnival, the celebrations and a host of other activities taking place there. And I just felt the second generation, having the first one done, the second one would be best done within a public space. And the park was one place I thought of. And then, fortunately, when I mentioned it to Suzanne, she relayed the history of the relationship with the park, which just fitted nicely for me. So I was quite pleased to do that. Because when these places, we occupy this space, but somehow, you have to understand, we didn't really come here to stay, we only come to make 2 shillings and go back, really. 5 years was the duration. We had the idea of, we had the American farming system where we used to go and spend 6 months. My grandfather went on this, where you go and pick fruits or, pick melons or pick oranges or whatever it is, and you go back. And they all used to come back with an American hat, and American shoes, and as Louise Bennett said, a speaky, spokey American, and stuff. And then they would disappear. And interestingly, so at that point when you find that the mother they left behind, and including those who were in England, the men who came to England, as soon as they came back, the women were pregnant and they're off again because they had to come back to England to work. So there was this relationship that was going on. And I think it was Roosevelt at the time was deciding that, not too many black people, he didn't want them in his country. So, and Britain had offered, and the farming, which a lot of people did in the country, wasn't going too well. So a lot of people decided, with the new call from Britain, the mother country, to respond to, to their needs, decided to come to England. But 5 years was the duration of the passport, and 5 years was the time they gave themselves to stay in England. Now, things don't work out like how you plan it. You know what I mean? You come and you have kids, you buy a house and all of this sort of thing. You realize you can't go back because you went back on a few holidays and it just don't suit you up in the bush. You have to ride donkey and all them things. The donkey comes into it again. So a lot of people stay here and then they start sending for their children. And in fact, my coming to England was, I think, in response, as was a lot of people later on, not the first generation, but the ones who sent for us, was in response to the changes in the immigration law. So they would say, because they're going to stop people coming in, let me bring him in before they stop it, just in case. It's not necessarily that they wanted you to come here necessarily, but they wanted to if it were the case that they wanted you, let's say, bring him in. So yeah, we came here and then we set up shop and then they would send for children and so on, and then you have confusion in the house because the people then will come from Jamaica, come live here, don't get on with the one that was here, and the mother like the one them here more than the other one and treat them different and all them sort of something. So it wasn't pretty plain sailing, and it still isn't plain sailing for them. And not everyone liked it here either. Quite a few people, bawl from the moment they arrive and want to go back, but somehow, that never really happened.
Thank you, Vanley.
Is that right?
Let's move over to you, Susan. Susan is responsible. She's the program director for the entire Out of Many Festival, which, as I've explained, is an astonishingly ambitious festival that's taken place over most of this year in Leeds. It's a cross art form festival, and its lineup has been quite incredible. However, Susan, you don't come from a production background. You come from a sort of PR and comms background. You worked in Jamaica for several years, working in sort of luxury travel with fancy people. As you would. And you came back to Leeds, and you've begun developing these astonishing projects which really elevate black arts in this city. What's driven you to do that?
Thank you, Dawn. Thank you, Vanley. So what has driven me is that there was a complete absence or invisibility for me. I think what was here in Leeds and what was seen as black culture outside of the world that we lived in was carnival. And carnival is hugely important to all of us as a community, as a city, as an art form, and in terms of the heritage it is. But I felt strongly that that's not all we are, because we were seen as people jumping around in pretty costumes. And as true as that might be, there's a heritage behind that. So when I did come back from Jamaica, I wanted to ensure that, one, carnival was valued and respected in the way, and elevated in the way that it deserved to be at the time. I actually think there is a similarity between my work in public relations and communications and what I do now. Public relations, comms, all of that is about telling stories and sharing narratives and sharing words that connect with people and influencing people. What I think I do now is tell stories through production, through working with the Jamaica Society, through working with the community as well. It's just that now I'm making sure that I'm telling my own story, that I'm telling our story. Because there's something really important, I think, about making sure that the stories we tell that are our stories are told by us in a way that nobody else can do. So nobody can tell your story, Dawn, about you than you can, better than you can. The same for Vanley, the same for anybody here. And I think that if nobody tells our story, as Professor Rex Nettleford said, cultural icon of Jamaica, not only is it going to be not told, it's going to be misrepresented or forgotten. I'm determined that what we have that is beautiful, what we have that tells our story, what we have that continues the story of our parents, and hopefully will continue the stories of our children and their children. I am determined that we don't just protect it, that we preserve it, and that it's authentic and that it's true as well. I also think that a city has a responsibility to when it's telling its story, that it's telling our story too. And I think that quite often, particularly in this month, when it's, Black History Month, and that's all well and good, that there's a separateness, there's an otherness. There's Black History Month, there's the rest of the year, and then there's British history. And what I'm determined to get across is that Black history is British history. That we're not this other thing. We can't, we didn't just appear here on June the 22nd, 1948. We've had a presence for hundreds of years, and it's important that that is seen as British history. From a personal point of view, very personal point of view. I didn't go into the art gallery until I was 30 odd years old, when my uncle, who was an artist, also an ex-Second World War, a Second World War veteran who had volunteered from Jamaica, who told fibs to my grandma, to the RAF about his age, and got into serious trouble from grandma so he could volunteer, and came here. And I do want to share this with you. My Uncle Sil, who I adore to this day, and he's no longer with us, he, after serving in the RAF, applied for a job with the BBC. And when he turned up or went to, present himself, he was told he wasn't welcome because his presence was upsetting the other workers there. I'd like to think that the BBC is a much different place now. But for me, there's something about that journey of a first generation, and that represents something that they went through. And then it was he who became an artist, studied at St. Martin's, went back to Jamaica, came here for my mother's funeral, and then it was then that I went into an art gallery. When I told him I hadn't been to this city's art gallery, my art gallery, your art gallery, he was appalled and said, come on, I'm taking you and I'm taking your daughter. You need to be in there, and you need to make sure that one day you see you on the walls of the art gallery of this city. And I've never shared that before, actually, and that's one of the reasons why I do what I do. And so for me, I feel that, a city that represents all of us, because this building belongs to all of us. We all pay our council taxes and stuff. This building, this library, this art gallery, they all belong to us. And it is wrong if we're not represented in there. And so I thought it was terrible also that in order to see me, or somebody that looked like me, or my daughter, in the art of this city, aside from in a carnival costume, I had to travel 5,000 miles to go to Jamaica. And every time I go to Jamaica, one of the first places I go to is to the National Gallery of Jamaica. That's when I'm there as a visitor. When I was there, I was surrounded by it and comfortable in that and very present in it. When I came back, I felt it was absent again. And that was one of the things that drove me. And I just think it's hugely important that our story, that is as important as everybody else's story, is told, and told faithfully as well. Yeah, thank you.
I think you're evidently not alone in that, Susan, because one thing that's probably not clear from the exhibition, which I hope you all get a chance to look at if you haven't already, is that it is made from objects and photographs that have been lent to the Jamaica Society Leeds by, I can see lots of you in this room that have lent objects to this exhibition. So this has been made through the generosity of lots of people here and elsewhere who lent their objects. I want to, before we go on to, because I want to leave space for people to ask questions, but I just want to ask another couple of questions of you, Susan, if you don't mind. I know that with both this exhibition and the Eulogy exhibition, which many of you, certainly if you're from Leeds, will be familiar with, one of the things that has surprised some people is that both exhibitions have been incredibly popular. There's been a lot of footfall. I've been collecting from Leeds Libraries staff feedback that people have scribbled on bits of card, and it's quite incredible the sort of reception that it's had. I think one of the things that surprised people is that both exhibitions have been really popular amongst all communities of the city of Leeds. And I'm wondering what it is about these stories that gives them such universal appeal.
So I think I can speak for both the eulogy exhibition, for those of you that don't know, again, another Jamaica Society Leeds project that I was involved with, that focused on the lives and journeys of first-generation Jamaicans who came to this country between the 1940s and 60s, told through the guise of the content in their funeral programs, so the photography and the eulogies and so on, hence the name. We then, as a part of the Out of Many Festival, wanted to broaden that, to move on a generation to the second generation, and to look at wider than just the Jamaican community, the wider West Indian community as well. And the thing that I was adamant and committed to do, the things. One, that those exhibitions were excellent. This exhibition, I hope it's excellent, and eulogy as well, because I think there's an expectation of us as I think for all communities, but in particular for the black community, that it's going to be a little community thing, and that it's not going to be of the quality or have the production values that we deserve. And I'm not about that at all. Anybody that knows me knows I'm not about that at all. If I'm going to do something, not only will I do it to my best ability, which may not be perfect, but to the best ability of the people around me as well, that I work with the organizations that I work with as well, because we deserve it. I cannot conceive that I would try to tell the story of my parents' generation or my own generation and not do that well. I can't. And if I can't do it well, I'm not going to do it as well. So in terms of excellence, that's one thing. The other thing that I was going to do as well was to do that really by reaching within me and within my heart, tell that. Obviously, I had a connection with eulogy. Obviously, I have a connection with Rebellion to Romance. I think there should be a prize for anybody that can, apart from those that know me, that can spot me in this exhibition, because I'm in here sneaking about somewhere in the exhibition. Not you, Sandra, you know. Stop it. But I think the other thing was to make sure that we got across that these are human stories for all humans. And so when we had the paraffin heater in the eulogy exhibition, we know that's an iconic thing that is more than just a paraffin heater for Caribbean communities. It was the thing that kept our parents going. It was the thing that they boiled the kettle on to make the cup of tea, to set them on the road, to warm up their chest and their belly, to take them to the shift work in the engineering companies and in the factories and in the hospitals that they were keeping going, that they were invited to come and develop and to make good after the war. The paraffin heater was the thing that, you know what, when you didn't have a two-ring burner, that you would cook your rice and peas on a Sunday and make it stretch, as they'd say, for the whole week. So there was something about that is special to us. What was great to me as well was that there were working class families that came in from the Irish community who said that is us as well. What struck me as well was, and this is a particularly human story, and if you don't get this as a human being, then I don't know what you get. The story of mothers leaving behind children in the Caribbean in order to come, and it touches me a lot, this, and because I imagine my own parents, and I imagine so many people that I know, and I'm a mother now, have been a mother for 30-odd years, you know, imagining leaving my child and saying, I'm coming back for you. I'm coming for you. I'm just going to go do this. Stay with grandma. Stay with Aunt Ethel. I'm coming back. I'm just going to be a while. And that while turning into 5 years, or that while turning into 10 years, or that being something that they could never fix again. And I can only imagine what that's like. I can only imagine what that's like as a parent, and as a child who came here as well. So, you know, Vanley, you've spoken about it. I know there are so many that are a part of the Jamaica Society who have been in those shoes, and I don't know what it's like, but I can imagine that. And anybody that's a parent or anybody that has a heart can imagine what that must have been like. So there's been those connections. We had people that came from Saudi Arabia. People came from all over the place to see and saw and experienced eulogy, as they have done here for Rebellion to Romance. And what touches me every time is people saying, this is my story. And I think that's hugely, hugely important.
If I might just briefly add, I mean, the paraffin lamp is an interesting one, because what I hadn't said was that I have an archive as well. I collect ephemera related to the community, and again, I'm told I have one of the largest archives, which is housed at the library. My house is also full, and the contents of the house was in an exhibition at the Icon Gallery, and we had 25,000 people going through that exhibition. It's very popular, but the paraffin lamp, as you say, is a particularly interesting item. I remember telling someone, and in fact it's in the exhibition Blood and Fire at the moment, a lot of people when they come in, one woman, she saw, as soon as she saw it, she showed me the mark on her hand where she was burnt. Another one said when she was in bed, she used to love the pattern it made on the ceiling. One used to hate the smell of her clothes when she went up public. And another one said, I hated it because my sister died from a paraffin lamp. And then some older Jamaicans, now you pay your insurance every week and you don't get nothing back from it. So they had a little scheme where they used to just wear an old coat and stand up beside the paraffin lamp and then scotch it so they could claim some insurance. So, but I know a man who when he used to go blues at night time, he used to put the red peas on the paraffin lamp for cook, and by the time he said when he come home, the red peas done cook, so he put in the rice, and when he go to bed, when he wake up, the rice cooked, so rice and peas ready for Sunday. There are many stories, and you see these objects we talk about, it's not the object themselves, it is the story that we try to capture, and the objects that have, it might be the hair comb, the hot comb that you use in the ears, that you see that little burn on top of your ears, that women had, and all of this sort of thing. So for me, those were the stories and are the stories that we try to capture, and not just those objects, but the odd bits of papers and things that I've collected over the years.
Thank you. I'm going to ask one more question of both of you. So both of you can answer this before we hand over to the audience. And it's, if you imagine that it's 2042 now, which is 20 years' time, what do you think might be the stories that black photographers, artists and curators will be telling about black British life in the 2020s?
I kind of think, in one way, I think it was very similar to today, but I think a lot of people might become quite fatigued with this telling their stories about race, racism, identity, and things like that. I think we sort of, well, it started a few years ago. We've started, there's a sort of a shift, and I recognized it in, there was a preacher man who came, he was doing a talk at a community event, looking at young kids and things like that. And for me, it was quite disappointing to hear him say that, most of the people in the church are quite educated and they hold very good job. He particularly named a bracket that they're in and all the rest of it as to separate us. And I think that a lot of that is happening at the moment where, we're becoming, if you like, gentrified. And if you've gone to university and you've got some money, then you move out, to the suburbs and you don't eat yam and banana no more, you know what I mean? You start sort of just flash frying your meat and things like that. Yeah, you don't wash it, yeah, and you don't wash your rice either, So I think we're in a particularly complex time, really, and we're going to be left in the inner city with those others that we don't want to be associated with. So I think the argument will change quite somewhat as to, what we're trying to achieve. Because, if you've got money, I mean, look at those in the government at the moment, they don't have to talk about race because they can go wherever they like when they like. But your kids are still getting knocked down, murdered, and what about in the street? So I think it'll be multiple things, and it depends on who is talking about it, really, and who's looking at it. But I think what I do, and, what Susan does as well is really about how do we preserve some of this history so that they might be guided in some way as to the past that they share.
Susan, any thoughts about the stories that people will be telling in 20 years' time, looking back on us here?
What I hope, I don't know if I think, but what I hope is that they will be telling the stories of all the generations that have come here and made our communities. But what I hope is that they aren't the only ones that are doing that. I hope that everybody's doing that. I hope that in this city there is a place that archives our story. I hope that in this city there is a place that says, we weren't just here, we're still here. We didn't just travel through, as you said, we came and we fixed, and we're still here, and we built this city, and our children did it, and our children have contributed to it, so that everybody can know what our contribution has been. I also hope that the story that we're telling is not, as you said, fraught with racism and oppression and discrimination. That's a dream, I think, because that's going to be around in 20 years, which is a sad thing to say, but it is. But I hope that what our photographers and our artists and our spoken word and our literature, our art, what I hope it does is continue to present people or communities who aren't merely victims or headlines, who love, who work, who speak with each other, who enjoy art, who are just ordinary people doing ordinary things, and some doing extraordinary things. But I hope that it's just an ordinary story, and that we're not wrapped in trauma every time we're presented like a delicious gift to be experienced by somebody else that enjoys our trauma and our victimhood. And I hope that's where we are in 20 years' time.
But if I might just, I used to look at the American experience, when we used to hear in the 60s, 70s, there used to be a lot of so-called black on black murders in America and so on, and, black people here would say, oh, it'll never happen here, only white people do bad things. You know what I mean? And we see that is, so for me, I've always looked, because that experience is much longer than ours, it's deeper than ours. And if you look at that if I take that as an analogy, then I think we will still be talking about race, and we'll still be talking, but I think we will have individuals who, if you like, as Susan says, dig deeper than that and represent, new aspects of our lives and culture.
And of course, what we understand as the Black British experience now is going to be very different in 20 years' time, totally. Because of demographics and new communities, and it will be evolving all the time. I really want to pass over to the audience, because I hope that you'd like to contribute to this conversation. Is there anybody that has a question for either or both Susan and Vanley?
Hi all, it's Sandra. Thank you for what you've said so far. I've enjoyed it, I've been enthralled actually. I wanted to ask Vanley, because I think we spoke earlier, and you said that it's the first you've seen the exhibition, it's the first time you've walked into here. What is your impression of your work?
My work, not just my work, the exhibition, brilliant, excellent. It's what we need. We need, I think, I've crowned her, but she hasn't had it as yet, I haven't made it as yet. She's just brilliant to have had the foresight to have curated such a deep exhibition about our presence, and it can only inform, as she said, it has done, it is doing, and continue to inform more people and others, about our lives and experience. And I think what this does as well, and it's not normally, sorry about that, boss. It's not normally recognized, is it doesn't just serve our community, it serves other communities. There are many people who are looking at their community. I remember when I used to work at the Polytechnic many years ago, there was this English secretary that we had, and she says, we don't have a culture as an English woman. but because you're living it so much, you're engrossed with it so much, it's almost like you don't see it. But we were talking about our culture, and not only have we influenced our artists and creatives, but we've influenced many other cultures to start looking at themselves and their whole process of, migration, settlements, and so on. So it's, we've always been trailblazers, and Susan has done it again, and thank you for allowing me to be a part of it.
Anybody else?
I have to have 12 questions, otherwise I can't go on.
I'd like to ask a question.
One dozen question.
I'd like to ask a question, just both of you actually, about these type of spaces. Because you said something really important that I felt as well. I didn't visit the art galleries or even the West Yorkshire Playhouse. These institutions that do belong to us, somehow we don't feel as if they're a part of we don't visit, basically. So how easy was it for you to convince them of an exhibition like this to hold it in these types of venues in our city? Because that'd be interesting for us to know whether they received it well or whether there was barriers.
Susan?
Thank you. So let me. I'm going to start by saying this: that in this space where we had eulogy, I've come back and done Rebellion to Romance. I know this space. I know how to work with this space. I know that the partners at Leeds Libraries have been brilliant. When we were thinking about eulogy, and that road to which began in 2018, finding a space that would work, because I think there is a shortage in the city of great exhibition space. That's a fact for everybody. That was a challenge. I think also it was around the expectation, and being told in other places, well, you can have this corner because that's what we give to community organizations. And I had to get across that that's not what we're about, and this is going to be really powerful, and this corner, it cannot hold us, in other words. And so I was very, very clear about that, and I wasn't going to accept that. The other thing that I think that those partners that we were working with and those spaces that we were working with had to understand that this wasn't just going to be good for us, it was going to be good for them. I think that, Leeds Libraries recognise that. I think that there are other partners that recognise that. The fact that, and I knew that Eulogy, for example, was going to bring people through this door who had not been through this door before. I knew for this, for Out of Many Festival, that there were going to be people that went to Leeds Playhouse on Saturday for Rebellion to Romance, the show, and in August for Road to Trojan, who had not been in Leeds Playhouse, nor in its previous incarnation, or as West Yorkshire Playhouse. What I think that everybody gets now, if you're in this city and this cultural landscape that we call this city of Leeds that we love. If eulogy, something that I was told you can have a corner in this room, can attract over 18,000 people in 6 weeks and still be the most visited exhibition in the 140-odd year history of this library, then I think they get it now. I think they get it.
If I might, for me, spaces has always been quite important. I remember in the early days when I used to take photographs, I used to not only have to, if you like, inform others about the spaces I wish to use, but also the people I'm taking photograph about the importance of being photographed. Because we're not a group of people that like to be photographed. You stick your camera in some people's face and you get your camera mashed up. So I used to carry a box of photographs around with me and show the people, and you open the box and you say, well, this is what I'm trying to do, then who will pay you? Where you get your money from? No, I'm not being paid. Then, it just wasn't believed. So what I used to do is I used to have exhibitions in pubs and clubs and school halls and wherever I would, and I still have exhibition in Shubbeans in Birmingham. it's important that the exhibition is not only in places like this, you know, but in the walls of your cafeteria and the walls of your hairdressers and so on. An exhibition, when I had a pretty major exhibition, retrospective in Birmingham a few years by the rivers of Birmingham, and part of the deal I have, and a lot of the times now with exhibitions, I will have some in some of these places. So we make a series of prints and we put them in this food shop. And this guy said, the owner of the food shop, it's Island Hut, by the way, for those who come to Birmingham, the best curry goat in the country. Check it out. But you have to, he's put a notice up in the shop now, it's 1 hour, you have to wait for it. He says good, you have to wait for good food. So anyway, what he said is after the shop closed, 7 of them were in the shop and they were talking about the photographs. And they decided which was my best photograph. That couldn't have happened because they don't have time to come a gallery. You know what I mean? Where am I going to find enough in a place that? So you take the images to them and let them start seeing themselves in those spaces and let them react to themselves. Another group of kids, this is from the demonstration, the 1977 and places. What they do is they download the photographs, and every month when they meet, they discuss their lives and history through the photographs that they have. The only thing he complained is that when he downloaded them, they were pixelated if I couldn't do anything about that, you know what I mean? So it's about making the stuff available, not only in these places, which is essential, but also in those others. And I think part of the thing, and I seem to see you've done very well here, is this is your voice. And a lot of places as well, we don't have a voice, although we are curators of the image. The space is not turned over to you, the voices still come through someone else who have an overview of what you're doing. And I think, you know, we need to have that voice. We need to have those spaces and the confidence to use those spaces. And I think we need to make mistakes as well. Not everything we do should succeed. We'll learn from these things. So yes, spaces are very important.
Thank you. Anybody else? Would anybody else like to contribute? Dad? Sorry, Clinton.
By the way, you can't say Clinton, you know. You have to say Mars Clinton. I beg fear, don't beat her when you go home.
Well, thank you very much. First of all, I'd like to say again, thanks to Sue. I know that Sue has very, very high standards, and whatever she does, she aims to make it outstanding, and she certainly achieved it in these exhibitions. But that's typical of Sue's work. So thank you, Sue. The main question I want to ask Vanley is, I can picture you on the top of that hill in St. Thomas, yeah, with your little brownie, your box brownie, yeah? And from there, you've ended up here and all of this stuff. Although I know most of this on the wall is not your work. And I think it's outstanding, the things that you've done. And I wonder, at what point did you realize that what you're doing is important and that could have some impact in the future? Because most of us, I started with a little brownie box 50 odd years ago, but never had I ever thought that these images would have any significance outside my family. Never. I just did it for the sake of doing it and because I enjoyed it. But looking forward, and I want to take you quite a distant way forward, 200 years from now. 200 years.
It's all right, I've been there.
Mm-hmm. Right. 200 years is not that long. Yeah. Do you think those images that you have in your camera and on the walls now, do you think they'll still be relevant to people 200 years from now?
Very much so. I mean, and from the moment I started by wanting to become a photographer. First, it was like the science of it. How did the image get from there to here? And then later on, the art of it developed. And it's like, how do you take a good photograph? That sort of thing developed. But from the moment, I remember, in fact, I often say that I can remember the paving stones I was standing on when I think that, you know, it is important that we write our own history. And the emphasis there is on history in terms of that. And I thought to myself, I didn't think 200 years from now. What I thought was the Greek and Roman history started at some point. And when you look back at it, it is not the Greek or Roman people that you see, but it is what they've left behind, which is often bits of carved bits of stones and so on, writings and so on. And I felt 2,000 years from now, it will be our time. So I was not only looking 200, but 2,000 years ahead of where we were. Not only will this have influenced all this, because the photograph will live on, not necessarily in their raw form. They might not exist because they, you know, I might not have fixed them properly or whatever it is. But the writings about the story, about the photographs, and the way people have used that legacy over the years, the stories will live on. We've only to look at, you know, again, America, or look at other places and to see, you know, our experience in those countries, to see how, you know, all those images and things have been used. So yes, beyond 2,000 years, there will be of some influence, because they exist and they will be in the writings. The archive I think I have sometimes, not so much this year or a couple of years now, but previously we would have at least 10, 20 people who reference the archive to write dissertations and to write books and to use in films and things like that. So those photographs lives on in different forms as well, not just in the physical form that you see them.
Thank you. Any other contributions?
Hi, good evening. Over the last 2-3 years, I've worked with black photographers around the world, just promoting the notion of the black gaze, because photography as a practice is predominantly male, predominantly white, and predominantly middle-aged. What advice or encouragement would you give to young black people who are thinking of coming into photography?
You mean young people like yourself?
I'm glad you said I'm young.
I would just say keep taking the photographs. You know, don't stop. I mean, for those who are familiar, I did do a Desert Island Disc program, you know, a bit of publicity there. But I remember when I was in the dark room many a times and you wonder what you're doing here, you know, the one song I played was Not Giving Up. I don't know why I'm doing it, but I'm not giving up. There was no money in it. My younger brothers used to just slip me a 10, 20 quid every now and then, and perhaps they still do, you know what I mean? But, you know, you're not giving up. There is something there worth fighting for. And sometimes, like I say, you don't know where it will end, but the whole process is to keep on keeping on.
Thank you. Another question at the back?
I just had a question about your experience with photography. So you mentioned someone who went to Jamaica to learn how to really photograph black people properly, and in your own experience, how do you feel that, what differences do you experience when photographing black people? Do you feel like there is a particular difference, or and on the other side of that lens, do you feel that black people respond differently in front of the camera, perhaps to white people or any other race specifically?
No, I think it depends on how you relate to people. You know, as you see, the way you approach them is quite different. You have to kind of like, you can't go head on. You know, I mean, if you see a beautiful photograph and you say, can I take this photograph? And this person said to you, sorry, I'm not really talking in this, am I? I keep forgetting the mic. And you say to this person, can I take a photograph of you? And they say no. You know, a lot of people, you know, they go away and they say, all right, you know, and they try another person and they might say no. What I do is you have a dialogue with that person. You talk to that person, you tell them why you're trying, and if they keep saying no, I say to them, if I take the photograph and you don't like it, I'll give you the negative to destroy, or you press the delete button on the camera. So it's about that idea of, it's how you relate. I've taken lots of photographs. I've worked in South Africa. In fact, this is one that you hadn't mentioned, sorry. I photographed Mandela's release in South Africa in 1990. And again, it's a different experience for me. You know, they might be black, but they still have different culture. And it's like, how do you approach, how do you get into that culture? Again, I worked in India where I used to do some teaching, and the people, you know, you take photographs. And it's like, how do you get in? The people are people. Basically, you have to see them as that. And then you try and explain to them what you're trying to achieve and trying to convince them to go on that road with you.
Thank you. I think we've got time for another one or two.
Good evening. I have a question for both of you. Firstly, Susan, I have to acknowledge that I owe you a poem. It's coming. This exhibition is beautiful, and Susan, I wanted to ask you about the placement, the spacing of the images, because moving through here, I really feel that same sense I get when I visit family and we look through an album of like simultaneity, one image not having a higher position than another, and just stories washing over me. What was your experience of, I guess, getting all of this to be in this physical form?
For me, it was very deliberate. First of all, we had to work with the space because it is what it is. There aren't many spaces around, you know, that have these high arches and grids on them and so on. So we had to work with it and not against it. I was very clear around the placement of the portraits. So, you know, they were going to be on the left, the portrait, the back in the day portrait, and then Vanley's portrait. And they're not a haphazard placement either. I was very clear about, you know, how high up they needed to be and how close we were to making eye contact as well, depending on how far back you stood. Also around who sits next to who and what difference that makes as well. So over here, for example, the two dapper gentlemen here, Clyde and Delroy, I was very clear that they were placed there because Clyde is the brother of Glenville Sheriff, who is here, who has such an iconic placing in the community because of his involvement in the so-called Bonfire Night trials, and Clyde's as well, back to 1976. So I wanted to make sure those two brothers were there. I wanted to make sure that they were also next to the image at the end there of Hopper, as we know him as Claude Hendrickson, with Joe, who is here tonight, and his brother Patrick as well. Because I think there's something about those young men in that corner and that placement that is really, really powerful as well. I think it was really important over here in kind of what I've called the rebellion room, to have a statement that relates to that whole period of uprising and looking at protest and activism in the era of the 70s and 80s, and not just, you know, protest with a placard, but protest through the arts as well. So you'll see something there. In here, I was very clear. I wanted this to feel a little bit like a Lovers Rock party. So you'll see the gabici and the pleats and the record sleeves and so on. So it's very, very much about what story, not just the content tells, but its placement as well. Yeah.
And the wallpaper.
And the wallpaper. And the wallpaper, which of course means so much to us. Those that know, there's a patch on the wallpaper that's a little bit, shall we say, hint, rubbed out in the Lovers Rock room. And I deliberately, there you go, and I deliberately didn't put any explanation on there so that people can connect with it and either ask, why is this rubbed out here? Or just look at it and smile and remember a day when perhaps they may have been involved in the rubbing out of said wallpaper. So yes.
In fact, we call it grease in the wallpaper.
Is that a Birmingham thing?
It
greasing?
is a Birmingham thing,
Okay,
yes.
okay. So that's, I hope that answers that.
Thank you, it
yeah.
really does. Thank you, that was
We've got
beautiful.
time for one more question. The gentleman at the back. Thank you. With the gap. Is it a gap top? Yeah.
Great, thank you very much. Amazing exhibition. My question is more, it's going to lead to an advice probably. How important it is for the new generation of photographers to portray our stories positively. And why I'm asking that is because now the new photographers believe that sharing the suffering or things that don't have value to our cultures will make more money than celebrating the beauty. Because if you look around here, all the pictures portray smile. Yes, people were going through a hard time, but you can see that they are happy. So, how important it is to us, the younger generation, to tell our story positively.
I think it's very important to tell your story positively, but you have to understand that it's also important to show the suffering as well. You know, you will have, so we won't necessarily have the same photographer photographing the same two different subjects, but you will have different photographers concentrating on different aspects of your culture. I think the full story can be told through, the sad photographs and all the others that, that we encounter, really. I mean, whether it be, I think it should be done through religion, through, work with social services, with the prisons. It should be done through, education, the kids, and their achievement. All of those, if you like, forms of, for me, a package which you can put in a box and say, this was the 2000s, or this was 1970s, or whatever it is. It's a combination of the two, really. And I don't think we should, just say that it should be one or the other, personally.
I think.
Thank you. Sorry, Susan. No.
Very, very briefly. I think what's really important as well, for me, it's about authenticity. Yes. And in that authenticity, as I'd said before, and as Vanley's saying, it's not all about suffering. It's important that we capture authenticity by looking at all the layers of our lives as well. I think that authenticity also comes from having a familiarity with that. So when I've been asked about, so you've done first generation, you've done second generation, are you going to do third and fourth? That's not for me to tell. That's not my story to tell. That's for my daughter's generation and her children's generation to tell, to be able to tell that authentically. So I'm just putting it out there. I'm not doing this exhibition for the next generation. And that anybody under here that's like 40 and under, I'm looking to you to go do that. But I think it's really, really important that authenticity comes from us, and that it's multi-layered, because we're not just about any one thing. So yeah.
Thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure to hear both of you this evening. So I think we've left learning a lot more about your practice, Vanley, and what has compelled you to carry on chronicling, not just Black lives actually, because I know that you work with other communities as well, but I think we've learned a lot about what compels you to do that.
If I might just interrupt just briefly, I remember I went through, the whole thing, I went through a time when, I've appointed myself as photographer, my people, who are my people, who's my community, do they know that I'm taking the photographs? And I thought to myself, if I were to advertise that I was going to burn my negatives in Handsworth Park, on a particular day or time, who would care about this? Would they bother? And I was going through Handsworth Park, and I said to one young man, I said, I explained to him, this whole thing about burning the photographs, and he says, they're not yours to burn. And that was the answer that I needed, really. You talk about carrying on taking photographs, that was the answer I needed.
And that's also a perfect end, actually. That's a better end than what I was intending. Thank you, Vanley. Thank you, Vanley. Thank you, Susan. For those of you that haven't had a chance to have at least a glance of this excellent exhibition, have a glance now. It's going to be open certainly till the end of this month. So please do make a visit. And in the meantime, if we could just thank Susan and Vanley.